You put money in emerging markets. Things that were once seen as too risky to put even money in, I can get a 5% return on that, I'll put that money in there. What is now gradually happening, as Q is ending, is that trade is regime change in Iran. So basically for 20 years now, since he worked for the Bush administration, he has long advocated that regime change in Iran is necessary precondition to restarting swing states. And what you saw is that people in sort of, I guess, the less wealthy states, and particularly those of less higher incomes, are the ones that are the grumpiest about this. So yes, I think that is why you see that every year since we started 5 years ago, and it's almost felt like every year was the perfect year to convene because there was a threat always being posed. Russell is saying, we want it now because they don't want anyone else getting ideas. Britain, even the lead campaigners, want to delay that. So that's going to be a real point of conflict in the coming days and coming weeks. The other dynamic.
How different are these elections taking place in the midst of a pandemic?
It's hugely different. I mean, for any number of reasons. I mean, obviously, part of the thing that has happened over the last 6 months because of the pandemic is everything's become politicized. So whereas 4 years ago, most Americans weren't paying attention to the presidential race until the very end, the politics of the pandemic have been playing out in our daily lives, again, since March. So even things like, should I go to a sporting event or not? Should I send my kid to school or not? And even in the US, should I wear a mask or not? I mean, our entire lives have become politicized. So, if you look at the polls, for instance, far fewer undecided voters. I mean, people just feel very strongly one way or the other. The other thing is obviously just logistics, right? Many states have been forced to start early voting, weeks in advance. I actually voted last weekend here in New York. So there have been more than half of the number of people who voted 4 years ago have already voted, and we're still 5 days away from election day. So it used to be everyone has to show up on a Tuesday, which never made a whole lot of sense. And a lot of people couldn't get the day off from work, and there's a lot of political apathy in the country to begin with. So the fact that there is now, logistically, because of COVID, a push for mail-in voting and early voting, suddenly participation goes up, and you've seen these queues around the corner in almost every state, including here in New York, but in Georgia, in Pennsylvania, in all these big swing states where turnout, frankly, helps Biden, I think.
Polls since last January, even before Joe Biden was officially the Democratic candidate, showed a 7-point lead, a 9-point lead, and still do. Is that a reliable prediction, you think, or are we gonna relive 2016 when all polls showed Hillary and then Donald Trump was elected?
Well, on the national level, I am pretty confident that the polls are pretty strong. And as you said, it's been steady. I mean, again, the other thing which people forget about Trump and Hillary is that Hillary was ahead and then Trump was ahead and then Hillary was ahead. It depends on the latest scandal that happened, whether it was the Access Hollywood tape, suddenly Hillary went up, James Comey from the FBI would come out with a press conference and then suddenly Trump was back up again. It has been remarkably steady, as you said, even before Biden was the nominee, but certainly since Biden has been the nominee, at least he's had a 6 to 7% lead. It's got only up to 13% in the average. So it's always been in that, and it hasn't moved at all.
Being one of the very few American journalists who knows and understands Brussels so well, can you describe in what state transatlantic relations are after 4 years of the Trump administration?
It's very bad. It's very bad. I mean, not only because Trump has picked slightly bizarre ambassadors to the EU and has constantly belittled the EU, describing it as an economic enemy, and then NATO obviously similarly has been denigrating NATO for 4 years. So I think the state of the transatlantic relationship is as bad as it's been, frankly, since World War II. Now, I guess the thing I would say is, there's been a big debate about to what extent that is repairable if Biden wins. And I think there's a lot of nervousness on both sides of people who consider themselves Atlanticists that there's permanent damage done and it's not fixable. I guess I would consider myself someone who disagrees with that. And I think people forget that to a certain extent, certainly not to the extent that Trump did it, but when Barack Obama came into office, remember, we had the Pacific shift, the shift to Asia, right? Obama didn't care about Europe anymore. He wanted to focus on Asia. This was the Pacific century. We are a Pacific nation. But as soon as a crisis happens, what happens in any White House is, okay, who's our allies? Who shares our values? Who can we rely on economically, militarily, diplomatically? It's always Europe. I think what you will see is inevitably that an American president who comes in with a slightly more normal traditional foreign policy will inevitably gravitate back to Europe.
Looking at the map, the European map, and especially our region, the East Med region, Biden would be somebody that would care more, would understand more maybe
the Eastern Med is trickier, right? Because Turkey is a NATO ally still, but I do actually think that Biden by nature has come up through a foreign policy tradition where he has really pushed very hard on things, anti-autocracy, for lack of a better word. And Erdogan very much obviously sort of is in the other camp right now. So I think you would see on issues of values, on democracy promotion, on anti-authoritarianism, I think you'd see him push back rather hard on Erdogan. The other thing we know about Trump is that because of, frankly, quasi-corrupt practices by someone with his inner circle, he has sort of cozied up to Erdogan. You know, he kind of likes the strong man, but people within his inner circle have sort of pushed for any number of sort of issues that are pro-Turkish in Washington, be it the Gulen, you know, extraditing Gulen from Pennsylvania back to Turkey and all these kinds of things. So it's been a decidedly pro-Turkish administration in that regard, and I think you'd see in a Biden administration much more even-handedness when it comes to the Eastern Med.
Could you talk about the legacy, if you can call it legacy, or consequences of Trump's 4-year on the leadership of America and the free world?
That sort of U.S. as an example has been completely undermined by Trump as a person, but also as the coronavirus response. That sense that the U.S. can exercise soft power as an example to other nations has been, I don't want to say permanently damaged, but certainly undermined for a long time, I gotta believe. And even a Biden administration is going to struggle to repair that damage.
Are you worried about violence that could occur with the election results? I mean, how possible is that Donald Trump won't accept the results in case he loses, and what that will lead to? A call to action, or what are you expecting?
Well, I mean, as now in my new role as an editor overseeing our U.S. coverage, I got to say I've assigned reporters to it because I'm worried about it. I don't want to say traditional groups. The groups have been a lot longer. There's a group called, for instance, True the Vote, which is a very right-wing organization that's been recruiting military veterans to serve as poll monitors. They've been saying it's not violence. They just want to be sure. But why are they recruiting military veterans to do this? So there is a lot of anecdotal evidence out there that people are waiting. And a lot will come down to what the President of the United States says on the day after Election Day. I again, maybe it's the American in me being optimistic. I do think that Biden's lead will be big enough on Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, that even if Trump says call to arms, that everyone will say, go away, we're tired of you. But if it's close, there are enough people who clearly have decided that they want to arm themselves, that it's a risk. And we have, as a news organization, implemented sort of security measures because we worry that the media could be targeted. And I know that's also going through the minds of a lot of state and local authorities who are trying to prepare for that as well.